Well, we have a new drawing, so that's awesome. So we've been in the Deuteronomy drawing, but no longer, because as we hit these poems, so the book of Deuteronomy concludes with two long poems, but these poems fit into a larger pattern that we've hit on a couple times before, but I think it'll be kind of helpful. So actually, we've got a little bit of margin. Turn to page 1. I always like saying that. Turn to page 1 of the Torah, and just note a pattern with me. So you look at page 1, and depending on how your Bible is laid out in terms of format. So if you look at Genesis 1 on the whole, it has a narrative flow to it. And so my guess is it's going to be just straight margins on the side. But then go down and look at verse 27. Genesis 1, verse 27. How many of you have verse 27 and formatted as if it's poetry? 3 little poetic lines. I think the majority, not everybody's Bible is the same. But verse 27 is a little line of poetry in the middle of the narrative flow. God creates humanity in his image. The image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And then you get a little epilogue of God bless the humans, here's all the plants, and then the Sabbath. Genesis 2, verse 4, the next narrative account begins. And then you flow down, and then look at verse 23, chapter 2, verse 23. How many of you have verse 23 set as a little line of poetry? Yeah, that's because it is. It's a little line of Hebrew poetry. This is now bone. This is what the man says about the woman. This is bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She'll be called woman, for she's taken out of man. Chapter 3, you see, again, the flow of the narrative there. And then starting in verse 14, do you see poetry starting there? Yep, verse 14, 15. And this is the curse on that snake. And then not the curse on the woman. He doesn't curse the man and the woman at all. He curses the snake. But he talks with the woman. Then verse 17, 18, 19, all poetry, right? So, in other words, there's a pattern. So think of the author of the Torah. Moses played a role in that, though I think the later biblical texts make it clear that it was Moses and then a line of prophetic prophets and authors and editors after him that composed the Torah as we have it. And so if you look at how this thing has been arranged, you'll see a pattern. And this is right here on pages 1 through 3. It's a pattern of there's a block of narrative that concludes with some bit of poetry, and then there's a little short epilogue to wrap up that little narrative moment, and then boom. And then that's how Genesis 1, 2, and 3 plays itself out. Now, what's interesting is it's also a pattern that works on the larger level of the whole Pentateuch. So the whole book of Genesis, the whole first book of Genesis, for example, turn to Genesis 49, which is the second to last chapter in the whole book. And it's the longest poem up to this point in the whole story. And what is Genesis 49? Look at how it begins. Who's speaking in this poem? Right, Jacob. So he's got all of his sons, his 12 sons around him, and look, it says Jacob called for his sons. Hey, everybody, gather around, because I want to tell you what will happen. And in the NIV, New International Version, it translates in the days to come. I want to tell you what will happen in the days to come. Any other renderings, translations? What will befall you in the last days? Oh, wow. That sounds a lot more exciting, doesn't it? Any other translations? Days to come or last days? I thought there's usually a little more variety in the room. Let's see. NIV has days to come. The ESV has days to come. The New American Standard has days to come. Oh, well, maybe not. And then good old King James. King James, New King James. There you go. There you go. In the last days. So this is a really, really interesting phrase. Literally, the phrase is. Sorry. Let me blow it up for you. At the end of days, or I've got it up there on the board for you. And in Hebrew, I don't know why I like the sound of it, but I do. Be'acharit ha-yamim. So yamim is the word for days. Ha is the word the, at the end of the days. But what's interesting is this word right here, be'acharit, which means at the end. At the end. And this is interesting for a number of reasons too. What's the first word in the Torah? Or the first phrase in the Torah. Sorry, in Hebrew it's one word. But what's the first phrase in the Torah? So in the beginning, which in Hebrew is one word, Bereshit. So you have in the beginning, as the story begins, of course, but then you have this poem. We already noted this pattern right here that kind of, and you can follow this pattern through other parts of the book of Genesis, but then it looks like the whole book of Genesis follows this pattern too. And so it begins Bereshit, and then the last major poem is marked with beginning of Be'acharit at the end. So whatever this phrase means, the point is we are stepping out of the story and then we're looking at the whole storyline of the Bible as it flows into the rest of history here. And it's blessings on each of the 12 tribes. And then you may or may not remember, but the blessing on the tribe of Judah is the first full-blown messianic, like royal promise. So if you look down, I'll just throw it up here. Genesis 49, verse 8. Hey, Judah, you're awesome. Your brothers are going to praise you. You're going to be elevated among all the tribes, right? Your father's sons will bow down to you. You're like a lion's cub, Judah. You return from the prey like a lion who crouches and lies, like a lioness who dares to rouse them. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet. So Judah is going to be the tribe of royalty. From what tribe does David come? He comes from the line of Judah. So we're looking forward here, this prophecy, in terms of Judah is destined to become the leader among the brothers, the greatest tribe among the tribes, and the tribe from which Israel's kings will come. And then Judah will remain the royal tribe until one comes to whom that scepter and rule truly belongs, and all the nations are going to give their obedience to that one. Come on. So this is really quite remarkable. All of a sudden we were at Bereshit, but now we're talking about Be'acharit, the end of days. The pattern continues. Go to Exodus 15. Get along. No coffee yet.
No, it's not gonna.
It's not going to happen. It's just cold.
Yeah, and it's like broken. It's not working. So.
Whoa.
Sorry, everybody.
Do you want cold coffee? No way. Who wants that? That's worse than... Anyway. Okay, sorry guys. Water. We don't even have water. There's the thing of cream back there. You want a cup of cream. Okay, Exodus 15. So you have the whole Exodus story, let my people go. Then you have Exodus 15. And it's the next really large poem. And it's right after the Israelites come come out of Egypt. They sing this great song, yes, praise Yahweh, he rescued us, and it's awesome. It doesn't begin with this phrase right here, end of days. And what's interesting, the poem does have a forward glance to it, but it's forward looking to the time of Joshua and how the people are going to be brought into the promised land. So it's an important poem. It's a crucially important poem, but it doesn't fit into this bigger macro kind of structure that the next large set of poems. It's a significant poem. The next large poem is in Numbers 23 and 24. Do you guys remember? Let's go there. Numbers 23, 24. Do you remember that deal? This was, oh boy, spring? Maybe spring. We did this in spring. Who's talking in Numbers 23 and 24? Yeah, that pagan sorcerer, that guy. Right? Balaam, the hired sorcerer that the king of Moab hired against Israel to curse, and that didn't go so well, did it? So what happened? There's 4 poems, as you can see them. There's 2 in chapter 23, and there's 2 in chapter 24. And Balaam is supposed to curse Israel. He doesn't. He ends up blessing them. And then the last one in particular. Well, sorry. Here we go. Look at Numbers 24, verse 12. And this is Balaam answering the king of Moab, Balak. Didn't I tell the messengers you sent me, even if Balak gave me his whole palace filled with gold and silver, I can't do anything of my own, good or bad, to go beyond the command of the Lord. I must say only what the Lord says. Now, I'm through with you. This is what Balaam says to the king of Moab. I'm going to go back to my people. But come on, let me warn you what this people will do to your people in Be'acharit Hayamim. And in this last poem, he goes, verse 15, he utters his oracle. He clears his throat, basically, for this whole first line here. So the oracle of Balaam, son of Beor, oracle of the one who sees clearly, oracle of the one who hears the words of God, who has knowledge of the Most High, sees the vision from Almighty, who falls prostrate, whose eyes are opened. Now, let me get to the point. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star will come out of Jacob, and a scepter will rise out of Israel. I feel like I've heard this language in another poem before, and that's because you have. And it's a poem that was precisely introduced by the same scene. An important prophetic figure, come around, let me tell you what's going to happen in the days to come. And it ends up with a forward glance to what God is going to do to bring a Messiah out of Israel, and so on. Now, we don't have time to read it in context because we did that a long time ago. Okay, let's go forward then to Deuteronomy chapter 31. Isn't this interesting? So this is the kind of stuff where it's, intelligent life in the Bible. So someone has actually sat down and arranged this thing with a really intentional structure that follows this pattern. I didn't make any of this up, by the way. This is a whole bunch of other people's ideas that I've just put together. So the whole way that this book has been composed follows this pattern, especially in the early chapters. But then the whole thing has been arranged according to this pattern. And this last set of poems here has a similar trajectory. Well, let's just dive in and see. Deuteronomy 31. You guys remember where we are in the story? Okay. So Moses, he went out and he spoke these words to all Israel. I'm now 120 years old. I'm no longer able to lead you. Yahweh said to me, don't cross the Jordan. So Yahweh, your God himself, will cross over ahead of you. He will destroy these nations before you. You'll take possession of their land. Joshua also will cross ahead of you. As Yahweh said, Yahweh will do to them what he did to Sihon and Og, the kings of the Amorites, whom he destroyed along with their land. That was actually back in the book of Numbers, right by the poetry of Balaam. Yahweh will deliver them to you, do to them all that I've commanded you. Be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid or terrified because of them. Yahweh, your God, goes with you. He'll never leave you or forsake you. This is an interesting. Well, yes, we do just back up and put yourself. So they are not a standing army. They have been 40 years in the wilderness. They're fairly well organized, but they're going into a land has full of fortified cities and people who don't want them there. So that's a fairly terrifying situation to go into. I would never want to have to be a part of something like that. But the idea is that the only way this is going to work is if Yahweh himself accompanies his people. Verse 7. So Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the presence of all Israel, "Be strong and courageous. You must go with this people into the land that Yahweh swore to their forefathers to give them, and you must divide it up among them as their inheritance. Yahweh himself goes before you. He'll be with you. He'll never leave you nor forsake you. Don't be afraid and don't be discouraged." So actually, where are we, what story are we connecting to right here, where we're transitioning in the narrative? And it's right on to the very next book here. So the book of Joshua. So this little section here in 31 is kind of like knitting these two. It's knitting Joshua right onto the Torah. So even though the Torah is a distinct block of books, if you actually just turn the page from the end right onto Joshua, it just flows seamlessly as one coherent storyline. And what's going on in 31 connects it right up to there. So verse 9. So Moses wrote down this law. What's the Hebrew word for law? Torah. Torah. So Moses wrote down this Torah. What was this Torah? Is it the book that you and I have in our hands? Well, the book that you and I have in our hands also has a story about the death of Moses at the end. So that's a little problematic, So I think what we can say, and we've had little hints and clues along the way that there's been editorial, compositional work after Moses to make the Torah what it is. So I think what we can say is this is a proto-Torah, something like that. This is a first edition of the Torah. He wrote it down and gave it to the priests, the sons of Levi, who carried the Ark of the Covenant of Yahweh, and to all the elders of Israel. Moses commanded them at the end of every 7 years, in the year of canceling debts, during the Feast of Tabernacles, when all Israel comes to appear before Yahweh, your God, at the place he will choose, you shall read this Torah before them in their hearing. Assemble the people, the men, the women, the children, the immigrants living in your towns, so they can listen and learn to fear Yahweh your God and follow carefully all the words of this Torah. Their children who do not know the Torah will hear it, and they'll learn how to fear Yahweh your God as long as you live in the land you are crossing the Jordan to possess. So can you just feel the curtain starting to draw on the storyline, can't you? So Moses is getting ready to die. They're getting ready to cross the Jordan, passes off to Joshua. And so it has this note of finality. And so you have some sort of proto-Torah being shaped by Moses here. All of the writings about their journeys and what's happened along the way. The laws given to the sons of Aaron about sacrifices and so on, the account, all this stuff So Moses is gathering all this. How long did it take him? What was the Proto-Torah, and how long did it take him to? I mean, this is a really complex, intricate piece of literary art. It's a lot of nights in prayer and writing things down. Anyway, I have no idea how long it took. So, but he puts it all together, and who does he give it to? Who are the guardians of Torah? So the priests, do you see it there? The Levites. And then they are going to, as we see in a minute here, they're going to put it in the Ark of the Covenant, and it's going to be right there in the tabernacle. How often do you pull it out? Every 7 years, right? In the fall, during the Feast of Tabernacles, which we're in the season of right now. And you read it. Now, what happens every 7 years? Do you remember the calendar cycle? Every 7 days, right? You have Sabbath and you rest. And then every 7 years, you set all of the debt slaves free. Do you remember that whole deal? Any debts that you had totally canceled. So awesome. How's that? And it's this, you announce through these acts the story of liberation, and then you retell the story of the Exodus and the wilderness and so on, the Feast of Tabernacles, and you live in tents for a week, and it's awesome. And then you read the Torah aloud. And this ensures that every generation will hear the story, the foundation story, will hear the words of the Torah, and that they'll learn who Yahweh is and learn to fear him. Verse 14. Yahweh said to Moses, "Now the day of your death, Moses, is near. So call Joshua and present yourselves at the tent of meeting. I'm going to commission him." Moses and Joshua came. They presented themselves at the tent of meeting. Yahweh appeared at the tent in the pillar of cloud. We've seen all of these things before. And the cloud stood right over the entrance to the tent. Yahweh said to Moses, "You are going to rest with your fathers, and these people will soon prostitute themselves to foreign gods of the land they are entering. They'll forsake me, they'll break the covenant I made with them. On that day, I'll be angry with them and forsake them. I'll hide my face from them, and they'll be destroyed. Many disasters and difficulties will come upon them, and on that day they will ask, 'Haven't these disasters come upon us because our God is not with us?'" So pause real quick here. So Moses already had a hunch, didn't he? He already knew what was coming, but now it's absolutely certain. God is confirming Moses' hunch. So they are going to forsake the covenant. The covenant curses are all going to be brought on them. And they're going to ask, "Haven't these disasters come upon us because God has abandoned us?" And the tragic irony, right, in this covenant setting is actually no. The disasters are precisely now the form of God's presence with them, right? So it was his covenant love that rescued them, and now it's covenant love that's been violated, and so they experience the consequences of that. Verse 18, "And I'll hide my face on that day because of their wickedness and turning to other gods." And so this is a phrase we're going to come across a whole bunch in the next chapter or two. That God hides his face. And there's actually, I don't know what comes to your mind actually when you think of that. You think of God hiding his face, you might think of, I'm intentionally withdrawing his presence, which I think that's a result. But look at verse 18. There's actually two ways to read the hiding of the face. Why is God hiding his face from his covenant people? What does it say? Because of the evil they've done. So there's a long-standing, especially in the history of Judaism, there's a long-standing debate. Is God hiding his face as an act of anger and judgment and withdrawal of his presence? Or is he hiding his face because he can't bear to see what they're doing? You could read it either way. And I won't decide that for you because I'm not sure what I think about it. Except I think it's interesting that both possibilities are right there. And perhaps it's a rich metaphor that's meant to be both possibilities. But he can't stand to see what they're doing, and so he withdraws. But the question is, how long will he withdraw? Will it be forever? Verse 19. Now here's something else for you to write down, Moses. He wrote down the scroll of the Torah. Now write down for yourselves a song, and teach it to the Israelites, and have them sing it, so that it will be a witness for me against them. When I bring them into the land flowing with milk and honey, the land I promised on oath to their forefathers, when they eat their fill and thrive, they're going to turn to other gods. They're going to worship them. They're going to reject me and break my covenant. And when many disasters and difficulties come upon them, this song will testify against them, because it won't be forgotten by their descendants. I know what they are disposed to do, even before I bring them into the land I promised on oath. Now, there's one sense in which you could think of this as prophetic insight into the future, but do you really need prophetic insight if you've read these? Remember the book of Numbers? Remember how depressing those months were, right? That we were stuck in the wilderness stories. So it's both a prophetic insight, but it's also like the people have already shown through their track record of what's really going on in their hearts. So he says, I know what they're going to do, even before I bring them into the land I promised to them. So Moses wrote down this song that day, and he taught it to the Israelites. It is quite a song. We're going to read it. The Lord gave this command to Joshua, the son of Nun: Be strong, courageous. You'll bring the Israelites into the land I promised them on oath. I myself will be with you. Moses finished writing in a book, or it would be a scroll, the words of the Torah from beginning to end. He gave this command to the Levites who carried the Ark of the Covenant: Take this scroll of the Torah, put it beside the Ark of the Covenant of Yahweh your God, and there it will remain as a witness against you. For I know how rebellious and stiff-necked you are. If you've been rebellious against Yahweh while I'm alive and with you, how much more so after I die? So assemble before me. Here we go. Assemble all the elders of your tribes, all the officials, everybody gather around. I'm going to speak these words in their hearing. I'm going to call heaven and earth to testify against them. For I know that after my death, you are sure to become utterly corrupt and turn from the way I have commanded you. And so, in the days to come, or, right, bi'acharit hayamim, in the days to come, or at the end of days, disaster will fall upon you. You're going to do evil in the sight of Yahweh and provoke him to anger by what your hands have made. And so here you go. I mean, it couldn't be more neat in the sense of like nicely organized. You have this basic narrative of creation, the fall, to the promise to Abraham, and then to bless all nations through him, and that all culminates in the promise of a coming king from the line of Judah. You have the foundation story of the Exodus and liberation. You had the story of God's presence coming to dwell in the midst of his people, and sacrifices of atonement. You have the wilderness wanderings, another promise, Moses' final speech, boom, and then another set of poems that are all aimed at the end of days. So we know from these two, we've got at least a coming king from the line of Judah. So we also know that Israel is going to utterly rebel. And so this sets up a tension here. Well, if they're going to rebel, like what's the relationship of that to the promise of the coming king, and how is their rebellion going to get sorted out? And there you go. I think we should just read the poem, and it will bring all of the themes come together in this poem right here. Deuteronomy 32. Or sorry, the last verse of 31. So Moses recited the words of this song from beginning to end in the hearing of the whole assembly of Israel. Oh, yes, and I think I've given, yeah. So this whole, Moses sets a pattern here for how all of the prophets go about making their arguments against Israel and trying to point out and critique and so on. And this whole poem follows the flow of like an ancient lawsuit. You have witnesses, you have a case made, an accusation, there's a sentencing, a deliberation, and so on. So I've just kind of put that up there because it's a long poem. It's easy to get lost. But if you keep track, you can actually see the flow of the of thought in the poem. So let's summon the witnesses to their stand. Listen, O heavens, and I will speak. Hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. Let my teaching fall like rain, and my words descend like dew, like showers on new grass, like abundant rain on tender plants. So who are the witnesses so far? Sky and land. So this is interesting. So actually, and think through. This is a poem about Biacharit, about the end. What's the first line of the Bible? In the beginning, God made sky, and God made land. So creation itself isn't just the theater on which the more important stuff takes place, but creation itself is this witness to this covenant drama between Yahweh and humanity and his people and so on. And Moses' words, which are going to get pretty intense, are depicted here like rain that brings life, right? I will proclaim the name of Yahweh. Oh, praise the greatness of our God. He is the rock. His works are perfect. All of his ways are just. A faithful God who does no wrong, upright and just is he. And think, in terms of the storyline, these are not just abstract traits. I mean, the whole point is this narrative has just demonstrated who Yahweh is, and Moses is trying to craft in poetic form these memorable ways. So he's faithful. He led them through the wilderness. He's just and upright. He judged Pharaoh, and he also brought his justice on people of the covenant who were rebellious and so on, like in the wilderness. Verse 5. They have acted corruptly towards him. To their shame, they are no longer his children, but rather a warped and crooked generation. Is this the way you repay Yahweh? O foolish and unwise people, isn't he your father? Isn't he your creator who made you and who formed you? So he's summoned the witnesses, and we have the basic case right here. Here's the witness. Here's the, I'm so ignorant, you guys. So you have the prosecutor, and then you have the accused, I guess. Israel's the accused. So he addresses everybody. You have witnesses, you have the prosecutor and his party, Yahweh, and then you have the accused, Israel. Everybody's been addressed right here. And then the history of the case begins here in verse 7. It's the next movement of the poem. So let's remember the days of old. Let's consider the generations long past. Ask your father. He'll tell you. Ask your elders. They'll explain it to you. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, and when he divided up or scattered all mankind, he set up the boundaries for the people according to the number of the sons of... What do you got? The sons of... Some of you have Israel, some of you have... Oh, that's interesting. Any footnotes? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Yes, welcome to one of the most interesting little textual problems in the Torah. So this is a curious, well, okay, let's read verse 9 too. For Yahweh's portion is his people, and Jacob is his allotted inheritance. All right, what's going on? Just look at verse 8 and 9. What is this? What's this about here? Yahweh gave the nations their inheritance, and he divided up or scattered out all mankind. When was that? When was humanity scattered out and divided up? So think Babylon here. So, and the boundaries are all set up. So you have Yahweh scattering out the nations, dividing up, and they go out and live, and that whole deal. And the boundaries are all set up according to the number of the sons of... So, you have one whole set of Hebrew texts that right there read, sons of Israel. And so the idea is that, wow, okay, so and among all the nations, who is Yahweh's specific people and his portion? He scatters the nations, they have all their land and stuff, but who is Yahweh's specific people? So verse 9, his people, his allotted inheritance, because he's going to redeem them and claim them out of Egypt and so on. So the idea is Yahweh is actually overseeing all of the nations, and he is remember the promise to Abraham. He scattered the nations and then brings out one family through whom he's going to bless the nations. So he's picked one nation out of the many, but he hasn't forgotten about the many. The whole point is that he's doing this story so he can do something for all of the many nations. So, what was Yahweh's metric? Like what was his criteria for who gets what and who goes, where do the Moabites go and where do the Egyptians go and this whole thing. That's the idea. And we're told that the boundaries are set up according to the number of the sons of Israel. Well, how many is that? Well, I guess is this the number 12? This is welcome to a long history of Jewish debate about the meaning of this verse. Is it the 12 sons of Israel? Is it the 70 that went down into Egypt? Is that what's going on here? So those are the two main options. But what's interesting is you'll see in your footnote that if you have the sons of God, what does your footnote tell you? Yeah. So this is where the Dead Sea Scrolls, a few copies of Deuteronomy, as well as the ancient Greek translation, reads the sons of God. Now this is cool. You'll like this. So the word for sons of is the word b'nai, and the word for Israel is Yisrael, and the short form of the word God is El. So in Hebrew, it's actually just 3 letters that are present in one version of the text, whereas those 3 letters are not present in this version of the text. And so in this case, who are the sons of God? This is a phrase that's used to describe these heavenly beings who are they're like deputized or given oversight over the nations. And they appear in the story of the Bible in just one place. It's the story of Daniel 10, where he's in Babylon, which is now ruled by Persia. He fasts and he prays for weeks and weeks and weeks, wondering what's going to happen. On the 24th day, this is down here at verse 4, on the 24th day, this guy appears. And dude, he looks crazy. And he has no wings, by the way. I looked up, there's a man dressed in linen with a belt of fine gold. His body was like a topaz, his face lightning, his eyes flaming torches. So terrifying. His arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice like the sound of a multitude. Right? So it's clearly some kind of angelic being here. And he freaks out. I mean, I turned deathly pale, no strength. I was helpless. I didn't know what to do. And verse 10, the guy says, hey, don't worry, Daniel, you're highly esteemed. Your prayers have been heard. Look at verse 12. This is really quite astounding. Don't be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day you set your mind to gain understanding and humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I've come in response to them. But the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me for 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me because I was detained there with the king of Persia. But now I've come to explain to you what will happen to your people in the future, for the vision concerns a time yet to come. Well now, right? So this is basically, you have this idea that you have some sons of God who have been assigned to Israel, but then apparently Persia has a son of God assigned to it, and it doesn't like the sons of God of the people of Israel, so they were duking it out for 21 days, and then finally one guy broke through. And this is the only passage, at least in the Old Testament, that gives us any window at all into this reality. And this is precisely the reality, I think, that Jesus is reckoning with as he steps into the wilderness with his testing, as he sets his face against forces of evil. When Paul talks about our battle isn't against flesh and blood, but principalities, rulers, and so on in the spiritual realm. That's what we're talking about here. So what on earth does this have to do with Moses' speech? So here's the idea. Go back to Deuteronomy 32. You have this idea that when Yahweh scattered the nations, it's as if he gave them over or assigned to them. By the way, I think that this version is the original version, the sons of God. And so I think we're reflecting here on the story of the scattering at Babylon. And it's a moment where God gives the nations over, and as they're scattered, apparently, like the different sons of God are assigned to them, and then from them there's an untold story about this rebellion in the spiritual realm, and that there are evil spiritual powers influencing the nations. But Yahweh has chosen one people through whom he's going to make a covenant and work his redemptive plan to bring the Messiah, who will both save his own rebellious people, but also battle the forces of evil themselves. Deuteronomy 32. I told you, this is quite a poem. How you guys doing? Verse 10. In a desert land, he found him. Okay, here we go. We're we're retelling the story right here. So after that happened, Yahweh chose a people, and then what's the story of him choosing them? In a desert land, he found him, that is, his people, or Jacob, in a barren, howling waste. He shielded him and cared for him. He guarded him as the apple of his eye. Do you guys have apple of his eye right there? What's that? As the pupil of his eye. Actually, this is so great. Man, there's too many great little turns of phrase here. So yeah, apple of his eye, or pupil, that's interesting, of his eye. Sorry, that's too small, isn't it? This is really a wonderful Hebrew phrase. Literally in Hebrew, it says, the little man in his eye. The little man in his eye. And so, but think, if you're looking at someone super close, you're inches away, and you look in their eyes, who do you see? Yeah, you see a little version of you. I mean, that's certainly where this metaphor comes from. It's the little, so the idea is that he is so close to and intimate with his own covenant people. They're in his eye. And I don't know. Think 3,000-year-old human anatomy. What do you think is happening when you see yourself in the eyeball of the person that you're looking? Is it just a reflection? I don't know. I guess they had mirrors. Anyway, it's interesting. It's a great little turn of phrase. The little man in his eye. Like an eagle that stirs up its nest, is hovering over its young, it spreads its wings to catch them and carries them on its pinions. Yahweh alone led him, no foreign god was with him. So we're retelling a story of Yahweh coming down, finding him in the desert, hovering over them, putting them on its wings, and carrying them away. What a part of the story are we retelling right here? Can you remember an image of Yahweh carrying Israel on his wings? Yeah, it was the first line of the Exodus here. As they come to Mount Sinai. When Yahweh, as in Exodus 19, you saw what I did to Egypt, how I've carried you on eagle's wings and have now brought you to myself. And then he enters into a covenant with them. So we're poetically retelling the Exodus story as an eagle swooping down and rescuing its young. Verse 13. Then he made him ride on the heights of the land and fed him with fruits of the fields. He nourished him with honey from the rock and with oil from the flinty crag. You think of God bringing abundance out of the rocks. What part of the story are we retelling here? So we have wilderness, the rock stories, and so on, water from the rock. With curds and milk from the herd and flock, with fattened lambs and goats, choice rams of Bashan, the finest kernels of wheat, and you drank the red blood of the grape. So he brings them through the wilderness, but then into the land of bees and goats, right? You have all these resources and vineyards, and it's incredible. But then we read that Jeshurun grew fat. So, any footnotes by that word Jeshurun there? So it's a metaphor for Israel. I don't know why it's not translated for its meaning, but it means the upright one, which apparently was a name by which the nation called itself at some point. It's clearly ironic at this point because the upright one gets all these resources, grew fat and kicked, filled with blood, he became heavy and sleek. So all of a sudden these gifts become this source of abuse in some way. And then he abandoned the God who made him and rejected the rock, his Savior. They made him jealous with their foreign gods and angered him with their detestable idols. They sacrificed to demons, which are not God, gods they had not known, gods that recently appeared, gods your father didn't fear. You deserted the rock who fathered you. You forgot the God who gave you birth. So there's the accusation right there. He rescued you, brought you into the promised land. What did you guys do? You abandoned him. You used the resources for wrong purposes, and you followed after other gods. So what is the sentence? What is Yahweh's response? Yahweh saw this, and so he rejected them. He was angered by his sons and daughters. I'll hide my face from them, he said, and see what their end will be. They're a perverse generation, unfaithful children. They made me jealous by what is not a god, and angered me with their idols, so I will make them jealous or envious by those who are not a people. I will make them angry by a nation that has no understanding, which seems to be a reference to all of the nations that Yahweh is going to bring against Israel in a form of judgment. They are peoples, but they're not Yahweh's people. He's going to judge them by people that are not his people, because they've been following gods that are not gods. So a fire has been kindled in my wrath, one that burns to the realms of the grave below. It devours the earth and its harvests, and sets afire the foundations of the mountains. I'll heap calamities upon them. I'll spend my arrows against them. Wasting famine I send against them, consuming pestilence, plague. I'll send against them the fangs of wild beasts, venom of vipers gliding in the dust. In the street the sword makes them childless, in their homes terror will reign. Young men and young women will perish, infants and gray-haired men. So we're talking about now exile here, conquering by foreign nations and exile. I said I would scatter them. I said I would erase their memory from mankind, but then I rethought that one because I dreaded the taunt of the enemy, lest the adversary misunderstand and say, hey, think of Babylon saying, hey, who's Yahweh? Man, we crushed Yahweh's people. Yahweh's not behind all of this. We did this. Can you think of a time when Yahweh wanted to just call it, abandon the covenant people, abandon Israel, and just let them die in the wilderness? But then somebody comes and says, that's bad PR. You brought them out of Exodus, Egypt, So remember Moses' dialogue here. That's what we're recalling. They're a nation without sense. There's no discernment in them. If only they were wise and would understand this. If only they would discern what their end will be. How could one man chase 1,000? Or two put 10,000 to flight? So how could these nations, that especially like Israel's neighbors, in the book of Judges, Israel's neighbors that are way less powerful than them, totally dominate them? How could that happen? Unless their rock, the one who was their stability, had actually sold them and given them over. Unless Yahweh himself had given up his own people. For their rock is not like our rock, even as our enemies concede. Their vine comes from the vine of Sodom, and their fields from Gomorrah. That's a slam right there. Your vineyards are like the vineyards of Sodom and Gomorrah. Their grapes are filled with poison, clusters full of bitterness. Their wine is the venom of serpents, the deadly poison of cobras. Haven't I kept all this in reserve and sealed it up in my vaults? It's my prerogative, Yahweh says. It's mine to avenge. I will repay. This is the line that Paul quotes when he talks about forgiving your enemies. Forgive your enemies. Let Yahweh deal with them. In due time their foot will slip. The day of their disaster is near. Their doom rushes upon them. Yahweh will judge his people, but have compassion on his servants. Now, just stop right there. Who are his servants? This is a new idea right here. He's going to bring justice on his people, but have compassion on his servants. Who's that? Aren't all of his people his servants? So think through the book of Numbers. Is all of ethnic Israel true servants of Yahweh? No. So what's this about? So Yahweh is going to bring a form of justice on those who rebelled, but he's going to have compassion on and protect and preserve those who are his servants. So you have here for the first time this idea of a remnant, of a small faithful group within Israel who is going to be faithful, and Yahweh will have compassion on them while most of the whole of the nation will experience covenant justice. When he sees that their strength is gone, when there is no one left, slave or free, he'll say, now where are their gods? Where's the rock that they took refuge in? The gods who ate the fat of their sacrifices and drank the wine of their offerings. Let them rise up to help you. Let them give you shelter. So he's kind of mocking them at this point. You followed after these gods, so let them rescue you. See now that I myself, I'm the one. There is no other God besides me. I bring death and bring life. I wound and I heal. No one can deliver from my hand. Man, I have seen that verse pulled out of context before and used to support the idea that even every act of evil is the ordained will of Yahweh before. So don't take verses out of context. That's just a bad idea altogether. So we're talking about God's covenant people, and that we're talking about the covenant curses. And Yahweh will bring blessing and life on his people, but he will also bring the covenant curses of disaster if they rebel against him. And it's not some other God doing it, it's their own God. And it's not because Yahweh's abandoned them, it's because they violated the covenant. I know we're going over a little bit, but this is our second to last week, so we got to finish here. Let's keep going. I've lifted my hand to heaven and declare, as surely as I live forever, when I sharpen my flashing sword, my hand grasps it in judgment. I will take vengeance on my adversaries and repay those who hate me. I'll make my arrows drunk with blood, my sword devouring flesh, blood of the slain and the captives, the heads of the enemy leaders. This is a very evocative image here. So Yahweh is being depicted as dealing with his rebellious covenant people as this wild warrior with sword and arrows just going right into battle against his enemies. It's very powerful. And that's the conclusion. That's the decision. I'm going to bring justice against those who rebel against me. And then there's one last line here. So nations, you all should rejoice with his people, for he's going to avenge the blood of whom? Whose blood is he going to avenge? His servant. So here they are again. So we have this idea that most or some, the majority of Israel is going to totally rebel and become just like the pagan nations and follow other gods. But there's going to be this remnant of servants whom Yahweh has compassion, and then it seems now that they need to be avenged. It's as if they've been persecuted by the rebellious majority. And so Yahweh is going to bring vengeance to work on their behalf. So he'll avenge the blood of his servants, but he'll take vengeance on his enemies. And he will make or provide atonement for his land and for his people. And that's the end of the poem. So I have too many words up here now. So I'm just going to write the word atonement right here too. Holy cow. So we put all these poems together, and we have a king coming from the line of Judah, even though all the people are going to rebel. But there's going to be a small remnant who will be faithful to Yahweh, and he'll protect them or at least avenge them if they're persecuted. And ultimately, at the end of the story, he's going to atone, which means he's somehow going to deal with all of the sin and rebellion and the rebellious hearts of his people and deal with it and cover over it so that the covenant can truly be fulfilled. And that's how the poem ends. You're just like, well, how? How is any of this going to happen? And of course, you'd have to turn the page and keep reading the story, which we'll do next week. But there you go. How you guys doing? It's a long poem. I realize that, but we made it. So there's much to consider here. I'm going to close with a word of prayer. I suppose the final sentence should be, you can just see the story of Jesus appearing here in really rich colors, I think, because the stage is just being set for Jesus to come on and bring resolution to all of this. And that's the Jesus that we're following today as we go to work and whatever. So let me close in a word of prayer.